Welcome to the Corporate Venturing Insider Series, where I interview top practitioners in the CVC world and learn with you the best practices and golden nuggets that they have accumulated over their career. In this episode, we will be learning from Baris Guzel, partner at BMW Ventures. Baris, could you take a few minutes to share your story and how you got to where you are today?
Absolutely. And first of all, thank you so much, Alice, for inviting me for this. It's a pleasure to be here. Yeah, let's start with the background. So actually, originally, I'm from Turkey. I studied industrial engineering at Istanbul Tech. Then I was fortunate to go on a full scholarship and then study a master's in engineering and technology management at Duke, as well as a full ride for my MBA in North Carolina. After which I moved to the dark side. I did investment banking at BofA Merrill Lynch in New York on the Wall Street, and then Deutsche Bank's technology investment banking practice, where I worked in a lot of SaaS startups, SaaS companies, M&As and IPO transactions prior to joining 300 institutional VC funds in Silicon Valley. And then I joined BMW Ventures roughly 4.5 years ago. And this is my first corporate job. So there's a lot of learnings happening throughout the path. And also there's a lot to be discussed in terms of investments. And we've been so far in a quite fortunate position.
Very good. So I can already see we're going to cover a lot of questions because you go extremely quick. I think the quickest introduction we ever had. I think the 5 to 10 minutes, you made it in 60 seconds. So let's talk about your engineering background. How useful is it for what you do today?
Sure. So as an industrial engineer, actually, my first job experience was on the manufacturing floor. I was programming CNC machines and also going through all those different manufacturing methodologies, injection molding, die casting, CNC. And fun fact, you probably would not see on my LinkedIn profile, but my first job was working on the manufacturing floor of Daimler's bus plant doing Kaizen studies. And fast forward 15, 20 years later, my first investment at BMW Ventures was in the manufacturing space, in a manufacturing marketplace company called Xometry. It's one of those things that people say, do not think too much about the dots. In the long run, they connect in ways that you would not be able to imagine at the beginning.
That's a good way to say it. My first paid engineering job was in Siemens, so I think we have some connections there. Okay, very good. And what about your financial VC background? You were an associate in a VC firm. How much of that shaped what you do today? Because some CVCs have people who have never worked for a financial VC. How much of that do you think it helps you?
I think it is especially important given our unique structure. Maybe I can touch on our unique structure at BMW Ventures, what kind of sets us.
I remember visiting your office, and this co-location was really special because it also allows you to tap onto very high competency about the technology you're doing due diligence. Do you think that's a best practice for other CVCs or hybrid VCs to leverage? Because at the end, like you said, there's a lot of capital. Differentiation really matters. And you being able to tap on this level of competency for due diligence, but also for helping afterwards really matters. So any best practices about this co-location, or now that we were mostly remote, maybe co-location was different, and how did you make it happen?
Yeah, I think it's probably one of our secret superpowers, to be frank, because fundamentally, when you look at all those VC funds on Sand Hill Road, they all have different perspectives. Yet probably none of them has got as deep of a domain expertise or know-how we can tap into. We've got some of the best engineers internally who are looking at these topics day and night. So it's going to be very hard for somebody else to match that kind of domain know-how. For example, most recently, we made an investment in a company called Solid Power. Again, our unique advantage in this equation of us working closely with our battery colleagues who have been looking at the space for so many years, looking at so many companies. And also, I did a deep dive in the battery tech space. I probably talked to more than 200 companies in the space. I think I'm a much better investor because of my colleagues, engineering colleagues. And I hope my engineering colleagues are feeling the same way. They're better engineers because I help them see some other companies that may not be aware of. And we always exchange thoughts and perspectives all the time. So there's that kind of mutually beneficial, great relationship in between.
Oh, I will disagree. It's not your secret superpower. It's not secret. What I like about your model and what you're doing, Baris, is you're leveraging the best of a financial VC and being nimble and fast, while having the superpower of the mothership and the corporate and the deep insight into a space, and you leverage the two. Now, this is not always easy to do. It's actually extremely hard to do. Can you share some of the things that has improved since you joined BMW Ventures, where other CVCs should be like, oh gosh, I have to do the same?
Absolutely. So I think the independence in the decision-making process is crucial. because as a VC, you don't want to be in a position where you make an investment based on some data or assumptions you're relying on, which you don't have firsthand experience. That's exactly the reason we are set up in such an independent entity. So we do all of those exchanges, but at the end of the day, it's up to us to make that decision, up to us to take that essentially call and making an investment. And when we make that investment, we are the ones responsible. It's not going to be our colleagues. I cannot say, okay, he or she said this is going to be relevant. No, there's a reason that we've got such a objective, transparent structure in place. This means that sometimes we're going to get a lot of the interesting leads from our internal colleagues. We look at those, but again, we put our investor lenses. We say, okay, this looks like a very interesting company in this interesting market, but here are the hurdles we are seeing for this business to scale. And similar, when we bring those interesting companies, and our colleagues are going to look at those from their own perspective, which gives both parties a lot of independence in our decision-making process, but also accountability. Because if my investments go wrong, it's me making that decision. I cannot say that person or this person thought was relevant. That's why, as this famous saying goes, with a lot of power comes a lot of responsibility. So it's crucial for us to keep ourselves accountable all the time for those topics, because as sometimes corporates could move from one topic to another and things could change rapidly. And also, I think there's this different angle from a time horizon perspective, because you and I, if you're investors, we look for potential next 5 to 10 years. So typically, when you looked at the internal colleagues and their perspectives, they might be looking at the existing product lifecycle, which might be shorter than your time horizon. And you might be looking at something maybe potentially quite disruptive that nobody else could think of. For example, in a traditional setting, I bet if somebody came with Uber or Lyft, then they probably would have said, hey, they're not in the car making business. Why would that matter? But guess what? Over time, if they're able to create such businesses, all of those become relevant and interesting. That's why when we look at those opportunities, it's crucial to have that kind of financial upside potential to make them strategic relevant down the road, to be frank.
Yesterday, I had a meeting with Sean Carolan, who invested early in Uber. And one of the things he shared, which was really insightful, is that he had these metrics about growth and lifetime revenue and all that graphed into a graph. And even though Uber was still early and it was still the limousines, he could show this was growing like no other thing that he had proposed to his VC before. And what I like about all our discussions is you have deep opinions, informed opinions about what matters and what does not matter. And we all have also our biases. And I think one of your bias, I think you may know, I hope you know, but maybe not, is you like to look at things at scale. You want to see how big it's scaled. My own is unit economics. I like to understand unit economics and the roadmap for them. But you always talk about scale, and this is always one of the things that comes to you. Tell me more about why scale matters when it's so early. Maybe it's still about proving the technology, for example.
Absolutely. There are two components of that. So number one is very early on, I think investing is more of an art than science. This means that I don't think anybody has got a very good understanding what's going to happen in 10 years. Maybe Uber's angel investors have done a terrific job, but I bet for every Uber, they've got 150 they are marking off. So that is the first angle, which means that it's so much of closer to art. It's very hard to justify how big this business could become. And yes, in the hindsight, everybody can say, yeah, he was a phenomenal entrepreneur. I saw this coming. I'll be a bit more skeptical. It's much easier to justify those investments once this company becomes a huge success story than not. That is one component. So for me to be able to feel comfortable to bet on this interesting opportunity, which means also saying no to 100 other opportunities that are in competing space, because when we make investments, it's like marriage. We're going to be essentially working with that company for a long period of time. So we had to make sure that this business could scale rapidly. In the business of jet fuel business, to be frank, can this explode is the first question we ask. At that early side, it's more of a science project than an actual business most of the times. And that in itself makes it very hard to build conviction. Second component, for us to create strategic value, these companies need to be at a certain scale. Because if you're that early in your company's life cycle, then it's going to be very hard to create value for BMW as well, because car companies have got their famous high thresholds for performance. It is a curse because it's not easy to reach, but it's also a blessing because over a certain threshold, then you're in a space where the sales are extremely sticky and massive. So that is the dilemma all of those companies are going through. Otherwise, the easiest thing, I think, for any investor saying yes to early stage investment, very early maybe in the seed stage, this company came out of YC or X, Y, and Z invested. But the reality is, if your goal is building a sustainable business over time where you're betting your money and your career on, you have to be a bit more diligent. And I think this goes back to data, because the way I think about this space is very similar to back in the day. Edward Deming said, without data, you're just somebody else with an opinion. To me, without data, you're just another VC with an investment case. It doesn't matter much.
Okay. Now I can see you're passionate about investments. This is your longest answer so far. So this is really cool. Do you have a sweet spot in terms of stage of the company, the stage you really like to invest more than if it's too late or too early? Do you have a sweet spot for you?
So I worked in investments in Series A, B, and C. So C probably for me may not be the best opportunity given all the reasons we have highlighted. That is number one. And number two, it is important to have a bit more data sets in hand where we can be a bit more comfortable as discussed. So for me, I think the most exciting opportunities are the ones that are leveraging cutting edge technologies in more archaic and large industries. So I do believe that it's crucial to have essentially a technology in hand that increases efficiency and effectiveness. Again, this goes back to my industrial engineering background. And when we look at those opportunities, for me specifically, those are predominantly on the SaaS/marketplace business model, and also lately a bit more on the clean tech side, obviously with battery investment, given also the fact that I worked for one of the largest clean tech investors back in the past. So the idea is, how do you change the economics of the transaction? So typically when you look at those marketplaces, I can also give you some examples from our portfolio. For example, when you look at Uber and Airbnb, what they did was creating millions of new drivers and hotels. Similarly, from our portfolio, we invested in companies such as Zoom and Xometry. So what Zoom did was creating a new pool of school bus substitutes. Xometry created a new machine shop supply by flipping the local machine shop dynamics to first a national, then a global marketplace model, which essentially helps you to shift the fundamentals of the transaction equation where you move either the supply or the demand side and making them meet at a price point that probably nobody else can meet. So that in itself helps you obviously expand the market. And obviously, when you look at most of those companies, what they're doing is they're creating a new kind of a supply that helps, but over time, you need to build much more on top of it. So every single step, you hopefully are going to have an easier time to acquire new suppliers and new customers and create a network effect, which over time is going to turn into a phenomenal business, which is going to be very hard to catch for somebody else. Because otherwise, guess what? There is no shortage of capital. There's no shortage of competition. The question is, what is differentiated and what can scale rapidly?
Very nice. One thing you said is you need to invest out of 100 in one. And I think this ratio is probably true for any investments you make, which is you're probably going to say no 99 times out of 100. And I'm actually interested about how you say no to entrepreneurs. And then we would go into the when you say yes and the check size and so on. So how do you deal with saying no to entrepreneurs, which is basically 99% of the time?
It's a phenomenal question. I think somebody wrote recently, a job of a VC is saying no 99 times and then begging for that one time out to be part of that equation.
That's a good one.
What I care a lot about is being upfront and honest, because listen, I'm going to be basing my own judgment based on what I know and hear. But one thing that I'm not in the business of trying to just take more of your time and make you do things that are not relevant. So I think that's also very important to say a quick no if I don't have that kind of conviction and be upfront with them. And obviously, if this is just a one-time meeting, you can just say quickly no. But if you're going through a due diligence process, it's important to walk the entrepreneur through why you're saying no and why this could be relevant. I don't want to name the names, but this happened literally this week again. So there was a company we were looking at going through due diligence, and then over time you realized, hey, given all those topics we are digging deeper into, we weren't able to build the conviction where we could lead the round or participate in the round. And then we said, okay, thank you so much for everything, but we ended up deciding that this may not be the right risk-return profile. Happy to walk you through our logic. And then the entrepreneur picked me up on that, and I walked him through the logic, what we did, what are the topics we had a chance to dig deeper into, what kind of parties we've interacted with, what kind of analysis we have built, and what are the numbers we got. And that's why we ended up passing, because we didn't have as much data in hand. And then he thanked me and he said, hey, you know what? Then this might be a better fit maybe next round. So I would love to keep in touch. So that's the kind of interaction we are having typically, Nicholas, because this is so it's important to manage the expectations accordingly. And also entrepreneurs do not necessarily have a lot of time. That's why it's important to be upfront, to be as quick. And also in the same time, I always happy to help them to build internal relations with BMW. Try to ping our colleagues, as we are more than happy to pass along in companies to our internal colleagues so that BMW could potentially be a customer. Again, as I'm independent, they're independent as well. That helps essentially that transparency and objectivity in the process.
It really helps actually. And because you're upfront about this independence, it also helps clarify when you introduce to BMW, it's independent from an investment decision. I really like the way you've described it because it's about adding value even when you say no. How do you decide on the check size? And I'm talking about between two companies that you're in the same stage and probably the same valuation. What would drive you to make a bigger check than the other one?
So I think the fundamental questions are more around the company and how big they could be. And obviously we also got some targets we would like to hit. If you're leading the round, obviously that has to be substantial for us, right? Because we are a small team and we've got 50 plus investments already in our portfolio. We got to make sure that we're going to have enough of time for working with that company. We've got enough of skin in the game, to be frank. So when we come on board, we take board seats, just like a traditional institutional VC fund. And we enjoy working with all the other seemingly competitor car makers. We do not view as competition, work very closely with them. Actually, we help make introductions to many of those other car makers too, to be frank, because we're all friends and in the same ecosystem. Going back to your question around how do I say yes and how do I build conviction, I think this goes back to maybe some thought process behind how do we create outsized return as investors? Because like, how can you outperform the market? Could be S&P 500, could be other VCs, and potentially hit that whatever 5-10x return profile you would like to have. Depends on the stage, obviously. You guys are coming in earlier, so you may want to aim for much higher returns. And again, depends on the check size. And you always ask the question, can this company return the fund one way or another? So I think it probably boils down to three things. Number one is the information asymmetry component, meaning that you probably have got some more data about that company than else, meaning that if you are Sequoia, you probably get to see 10 companies in the same space. One of them has got 10x growth rates of the others. You probably are going to make investment. That was an easy decision. So for that to work, we try to establish much early relationship with those companies early on and see how they progress over time. So I reach out often to companies they just received or much earlier. There's a case in our portfolio, for example, there was one company. I really like the team. I really like their business model. So it has to make both sense, meaning that the story has to make sense, but also the numbers need to match the story. So the numbers were not there, but I really like the story, the team's approach, how diligent they were when it comes to their business model to create a value in everybody involved in the ecosystem. Fast forward, we kept in touch a year or two after that. Obviously, I helped them introduce to parties within BMW, with other car makers similarly. And then seeing that they reached an escape velocity and they hit the product market fit, they reached 10x year-over-year growth. We essentially ended up preempting their Series B round, and we did not need anybody else. We were like, okay, this is a phenomenal business. Team is really impressive. The market is massive. There's potential value here, especially winner takes all dynamics in the market. And we are fortunate to have led their Series B round.
But you took the full round or you led the round?
We led the round, but we put in a big chunk of the rounds to take substantial ownership in the company. That is one example. So first one is information asymmetry. Second one is probably more insight asymmetry, meaning that you and I look at the same company, you and I look at the same data, but we both end up having different conclusions. And I do believe that this is probably the most underrated part of skill set of any venture capitalist out there. Everybody talks about sourcing, but I don't think there is a decent understanding of deep data analysis and understanding of cohorts in most of the players out there. So there was one case, I don't want to name the names, but we all looked at the same company. This company has talked to all of those big funds. And once we started digging into data, and once I called probably like 20 plus potential customers and hearing over amazing reviews, amazing feedback for a business model like theirs, we built a conviction and we led their round. And actually, this was a substantially priced round. But I think in our business, you better invest in an amazing company, in a great company at an okay price versus invest in an okay company at a great price. We are not in the latter business. The latter is more private equity. That was a decision that we made accordingly. A lot of people looked at it and we were the ones digging much deeper into data, building those cohorts and seeing how this business could scale, even if they stopped spending sales and marketing today, and how big this could be. That was another example. And the third one is probably, this is going to happen over time. I'm not saying that we are there yet. it's going to take substantial amount of time for the track record and reputation over time. Then the third one is probably you can win deals by your reputation. Obviously, this is more relevant for people who have been in the space for 15, 20 years, right? Who are like known for making that X, Y, and Z investments that went public. They are luminaries in their vertical. They know what is happening in those verticals. And you as a startup can benefit immensely from that specific person's experience and network.
Sometimes this expertise comes with bias. And I think that's where you can add value, is that sometimes you can see a future they don't see.
Absolutely. That's why, again, it goes back to my comments about data. What differentiates you, in my opinion, we are all objective, right? It's important to have data to back that kind of an argument. Say X or Y or Z is going to happen. And there's going to be also that blindness of having too much of information always. That's also something to watch out for.
So you've shared a lot of golden nuggets. But one thing you've said, which actually is not mentioned a lot by corporate VCs, but a lot by financial VCs, is a potential for an investment to return the fund. Why would you ever invest in a company if it doesn't have the potential to return the fund?
Let me be specific. There are going to be cases where you could see maybe potentially massive different values. Could be potential partnership or strategic value where you can make those smaller check size investments as well. That's also what we do, just to be clear. But I think it is very important to bet on the companies that could potentially shape the future of industries. Otherwise, here's my main issue in general, especially given the fact that where we sit in the value chain. When you look at your typical consumer devices, you're looking at 9 to 12 months of design cycle for your iPhone, for example.
I want to go to something very light before we go into the end on something more inspiring. This is very tactical, and many CVCs don't even have a full-time marketing principal like we just have now. But you're posting on Medium. Most corporate VCs post on their own website or on LinkedIn. Can you talk us through why Medium and why do you think more and more VCs do that?
I think it's important for a few reasons. Number one is whatever you do, whatever rationale you're coming up with, it's important for everybody in the ecosystem and the information to be more transparent so that people understand what the main argument here is. Number two, it also helps you keep yourself accountable down the road. What did I do back in the day? Why did I make that investment? What was my rationale and how it turned out to be? And number three, it is also partially marketing. It also helps you let the market know that you made those investments, and companies that are in adjacent spaces would see your posts and hopefully your learnings. Again, this applies for your fellow investors who could see the way you think and also build their own thesis, and also helps you source more deals. I got so many leads from my posts, to be frank. They just email me out of cold. As long as I get cold emails from the founders, I always respond back, because I don't think that you need to have certain established network in Silicon Valley to get financed. And it's exactly against what I stand for. So
actually, I love what you just said, which is when you get cold emails from entrepreneurs, you respond. And I checked on your LinkedIn, and maybe the audience should know that your email is right there in front and you say you will respond. I think that's really telling a lot about you.
And frankly, Nicholas, I think I prefer well thought out cold emails than some weird, potentially warm intros, to be frank, because that shows that person has done
The work.
Go through what you are doing, what you are investing in, why what they're building could be relevant for you.
Very nice. So I want to keep the last 2 minutes for you to maybe talk to the entrepreneurs who are listening to us. What are you most excited to invest next?
If you're building a cutting edge technology-based solution in an archaic and large old school market where you're changing the economics of the business, that is specifically what I get excited about. Obviously, it could be mobility, it could be manufacturing, could be a bunch of different other topics. I hope that there's enough of information out there showing the people what we get excited about, what we are working on, given our scope of the mandate. We cannot make investment in dating apps. We cannot make investments in genetics apps. But if it's about mobility, if it's about manufacturing, if it's about enterprise software, which could touch automotive one way or another, if it's about sustainability, we would love to get in touch.
Baris, it was exceptional talking to you today. I think you're sharing so many golden nuggets and best practices that I think so many of us should emulate. So thank you.
Pleasure is mine, Nicholas.
Have a good day. Bye.
You too. Bye-bye.